Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. We're here in Warsaw, Poland for the 12th edition of the Global Forum on Nicotine, which is the annual conference on safer nicotine products and tobacco harm reduction. And I'm sitting here with Dr. Mark Tyndall, who is the author of this newly released book called Vaping, Behind the Smoke and Fears. Great title, Mark.
Thanks.
So what brought you to write this book?
Well, that's a good question. I think I always thought I'd like to write a book, and I spent a lot of time thinking about vaping, so why not write a book about vaping?
So for those in the audience who don't know much about you, and some in the US won't, what kind of a doctor are you, and what's your connection to vaping?
Okay, well, I'm an excellent doctor, Brent. So I'm trained in as an infectious diseases and internal medicine doctor. That was my original training. I also got training in public health, and so my career really has spanned infectious diseases and public health. And I got really, my career has also been defined by HIV. So I've been doing a lot of work in HIV prevention, both internationally and in Canada.
And we're both from Vancouver, and you famously have a lot of experience working with folks in the downtown east side. Maybe just describe a little bit of that for us.
Sure. I mean, I got to Vancouver, I guess, in 1999, and started working in HIV prevention with people who are using drugs. And at that time, HIV was pretty rampant in that population, and I got involved in prevention programs, needle exchanges, supervised injection sites, and safe supply programs. So that's really, I did that for 15 or 20 years.
So how did that turn into a focus on vaping?
Well, I guess my career is sort of defined by harm reduction, and vaping is probably the best example of actual harm reduction that you could come up with. That's taking smoking cigarettes that is deadly and replacing it with something that's not nearly as deadly, and but quite similar. So what's kind of interesting, comparing this as a harm reduction tool to other harm reduction tools that don't really simulate the situation very closely, but vaping, it's still, you put something in your mouth and you suck in some nicotine and you get an instant hit, and so it's very much like smoking cigarettes, only somebody invented something that doesn't have all the dangerous toxins in it. So yeah.
How would you characterize public health's approach to vaping? Are they open to it? No. I mean, I kind of stand out as an advocate for vaping. I mean, amongst my colleagues, there seems to be very little openness to it. And it's surprising to me in some ways, because they're generally favorable to other harm reduction strategies that we use. But somehow when it comes to smoking cessation, they're very entrenched in the idea that people can quit, and why should we give people an alternative? It's not necessary. And I think in Canada especially, there's again this idea that we're doing okay. Every year smoking prevalence in adults ticks down by 1%, and so if that continues, maybe in 15 or 20 years, we'll have very little smoke left in Canada, and people seem quite content with that. But the fact remains that 3.5 million people in Canada still smoke cigarettes. So if that's your attitude, then basically telling people you're out of luck, we'll wait till you die off, and then we'll start counting again. So it's to me, when we have a safer product that could really help those 3.5 million people, it's pretty unethical not to try and offer them an alternative. Now, is this just a Canadian thing in terms of the aversion to vaping, or is it elsewhere?
Oh, no. I mean, I think, the U.S. still is kind of what people look towards.
and they've been very antagonistic to alternative nicotine. Certainly the WHO has set the stage globally, and when I was writing the book, as I told you before, I lived in Bali for 2 years, and it's kind of one of the meccas of cigarette smoking. It's kind of like you've been transported back in the 1960s in Canada. So 70% plus of men in Bali smoke, and there's really seems to be no restrictions, and really even no acknowledgement that it's a bad thing. It's so entrenched in their society. So so I think, globally, I think a lot of countries are not acknowledging the safety of these alternative products, and there's a whole series of countries that have actually banned it. So it's pretty. It's such a missed opportunity, and it's probably the one intervention that you could do that would have the most impact on global health, and somehow major institutions are not looking at it that way.
What would you say is the main goal for a reader that you're hoping to have?
I mean, I tried to make the book quite accessible. It's not sort of a scientific book, although I try and back up my statements with references when they're available. But there's several audiences. Primarily, I think I want to make sure that people who smoke cigarettes understand the benefits of vaping, and even people who have transitioned, I think in the back of their mind, always wondering, well, should I have done this, or is it really safer? And so there's just so much misinformation, even among smokers who now vape, that I think the book will give them some reassurance that they've made a really good decision. For people on the fence and not sure, I hope reading the book they will understand that vaping is much safer for them, and a really good alternative that they should do. I think most people know somebody who smokes, so hopefully they can spread the news to that person. I think for parents who are really concerned with youth vaping, hopefully it adds a little bit of reality or to what they've been told. And finally, for policymakers and my colleagues who are responsible for making policies, and the medical professionals really need to get out in front of this and try and help people quit smoking. So it's a whole, so I've tried to make it accessible to all those groups, but basically I think the main target would be people who are thinking about quitting smoking through vaping, and hopefully this gives them some reassurance that that's what they should do.
Now, it didn't take you long to get into it. Like early on in the book, you attack some of the myths and misconceptions immediately. Why so early?
Well, I think one of the, that there is so many myths or misunderstandings out there that I think I wanted to clear that up front. I mean, I could have built up all my arguments and took on those at the end, but I think I wanted to get them out of the way in case people didn't have the attention span to read the whole book. So,
on page 6 in here, you say that they must be held accountable for misleading the public and denying life-saving alternatives to smokers. And who are those people?
I think policymakers and even my colleagues need to be held responsible. I still challenge somebody who has somebody in their practice who smokes cigarettes not to offer them an alternative. It's really boggles my mind that that isn't first thing that they suggest, and knowing that even I know with harm reduction, my approach to harm reduction shouldn't be used when everything else fails. I mean, you want to meet people where they're at, offer them something that is as close to what they're doing as possible. And so instead of saying, well, if all else fails, I know you've tried patches 30 times and you just can't seem to stop cigarettes, why don't you try this as kind of a last resort? I think vaping should be the first resort. You're smoking cigarettes right now, here's something that's quite a bit like what you're doing, only much safer, and I want that you should start that now. And then if you want to wean yourself off nicotine, great. If you want to stop using it altogether, I think that's something that, you know, I don't think it's that important, but we could encourage people to do that. Vaping and all these alternative things have sort of been left to, well, if everything else fails, but the things that they're failing are things we know people fail from. So if you look at, you know, a lot of, you know, CDC or WHO websites, they'll list a bunch of proven methods that they feel there's scientific evidence to do, but the only proof is that they don't work very well. So at the very best study, a nicotine patch is successful 8 to 10% of the time, and that's after often many attempts to do it. So they just don't work very well. And so I would think we'd start off with something that works far better, and then if people decide that they don't want to continue with nicotine, then they can wean themselves off.
So in the subtitle, Behind the Smoke, which is understandable, and fears. So talk about the fears part of this. Where's the fears?
Well, I think it's all driven by fear. And so whether right from the, right from the top down, there's fear amongst policymakers that they'll unleash vaping on the public and find out down the road that it's really not very safe. But they've used fear as the major tool to discourage people from using it. So the most obvious is the fear-based messaging for youth. So I think I mentioned in the book, you know, I went through a lot of the online clips that have been directed at youth from Smoke-Free Kids and Truth Initiative, and it's almost comical how bizarre they are and how fear-based all these messages are, and what they're telling youth to avoid is not based on any kind of science. It's just made up stuff, and so that's the fear that the medical profession or public health has put out there for people, and left them with just a lot of unknowns, like, you know, something like popcorn lung, which has never been associated with vaping. A lot of the messaging put out by charities and NGOs would mention popcorn lung, may cause popcorn lung, or like it's bizarre that they think that this is a effective strategy, just making things up and putting it out there, and it's just to scare people, basically.
It's interesting, when I went on Amazon to buy the book, which I totally encourage everybody to do, at least in the Canadian Amazon site, typing in the title, there was another title of another book titled Smoke and Mirrors, The Deadly Truth About Vaping and Smoking.
I didn't ever know that book existed. I know that when I've looked up vaping, what year is that from? 2025, so it's very new.
Very new.
Okay.
So isn't that crazy, right? Yeah. So when we're talking about the fear, so the deadly truth about vaping.
Yeah. No, it's a very textbook fear-based, and I did search Amazon for other vaping books, and there's none that have anything good to say about vaping. It's all about either quitting vaping or the harms and fears around vaping. And I know the literature quite well because of writing the book, and there's really not much out there, Brent. Like, you know, there's no studies looking at people who've just vaped for like 10 years and saying, look what happened to your lungs. I mean, there's no studies like that existed. Nobody's even doing it, but there's no reason to do it. So people who have vaped for quite a long time, they're not presenting to their doctors with respiratory symptoms. They're not getting lung cancer. They're not, and you could argue that, well, it takes a long time, it's still early, but you would think we'd notice some kind of signal by now, or something would be happening, and there's really nothing. So having books written about the perils of vaping, I don't know where they get their information, because it's just not really out there.
Well, it is fear-mongering, of course.
Fear-mongering, yeah.
Yeah, deadly truth about vaping.
Yeah, it's I went into quite a bit of detail around youth vaping, and one of the major arguments is brain. The developing brain can't handle nicotine, and any psychoactive substance. I understand the development of the brain is there's a fairly tender times early on, and probably caffeine, cannabis, alcohol, nicotine. I mean, I don't, I have a 12-year-old. I don't encourage him to use those substances. But this idea that it would cause irreversible brain damage, when we've done a global study of literally billions of people who start using nicotine in their teens, and we've never seen any kind of brain injury from that. It just doesn't happen. And I use examples in the book, like probably if you picked out the smartest, most creative people in the world, a lot of them were smokers, basically. So
people who put man on the moon smoked.
So, yeah.
I mean, all of the poets smoked. All of the musicians smoked.
Yeah. So I mean, nicotine does serve a purpose, and it's pretty hard to make a case that some kid who picks up a vape when they're 15 is all of a sudden reforming their brain, and they're going to end up being,
Which is exactly the fear that they say, so the statement is that nicotine harms the developing brain.
Right.
And it's a statement of fact. And to me, it sounds just like in the old days when, mom used to say, Johnny, don't smoke, it'll stunt your growth.
Yeah. Well, I did look into, I tried to dig deep where all this came from, and there are animal studies giving mice and rats mega doses of nicotine and showing that there are changes in their brain. Another interesting study I came up with looked at a 3-year study of adolescents and followed them with serial MRIs of their brain, and then did surveys of their substance use. And they found that indeed kids who had substance use had changes in their brain, but often the changes in their brain preceded the substance exposure. So I think the only hypothesis from that kind of study is that maybe some people are predisposed to use substances early on. But it didn't at all prove the fact that substances change your brain morphology with MRIs. So, and the other thing that, I've dealt with addictions my whole career, basically. And there's all kinds of studies using substances that do show that there's changes. And the more sophisticated our imaging gets, the more likely we'll find these things. But the brain is just such a plastic thing that it's quite amazing how it bounces back. And with heroin and cocaine, crystal meth, there's all kinds of literature looking at brain morphology when people are using these substances, and then when they stop, things revert right back again. So it's your brain is quite an amazing plasticity. It has quite amazing plasticity, and so I'm not surprised if you followed somebody who's used nicotine that there'd be some changes there, but it doesn't really equate to any kind of deficit, and it's not permanent.
Let's talk about something else that is steeped in scientific bafflegab, which was around EVALI.
Sure. And
so is that a real disease? Was there anything to it? It seems to have gone away. We don't hear much about EVALI anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I spend quite a bit of time talking about this in the book. I mean, it's just this classic use of a disaster that was turned into an anti-vaping program or her campaign. I mean, and EVALI has way more to do with prohibition than it has to do with vaping. So, the history of it's fascinating. I mean, the youth vaping so-called epidemic really started in 2014, 15, 16, and EVALI came in 2019 out of the blue. and it only lasted for 4 months. So any epidemiologist would know that it must be a new exposure, because it didn't make any sense that it came and went so quickly when vaping was quite common among young people for years. And they found the THC and the vitamin E acetate and vitamin E oil is very toxic to your lungs. So it makes total sense. They traced it back to brothers in Milwaukee who were making up this THC and using vitamin E oil. What I read about it is that they used vitamin E oil because it was a good color and it was a nice viscous substance, and it didn't even occur to them that it would be a toxic to the lungs or putting oil in the lungs. And they were very successful in selling this product. It happened to be in Wisconsin, which had some of the strictest cannabis laws, and so it was very hard for the youth to get cannabis, and so they found a way to get it, and it was made by people who didn't know what they were doing, and they poisoned a lot of people, and I think, 65 deaths and 300 cases or something. So it was serious for those people, and they shouldn't not have been using bootleg THC with vitamin E oil in it. But the way it was reported, although it was within a week or two, people detected the vitamin E and they knew this might be it. But to this day on the CDC website, it still says that not all cases could be attributed to vitamin E. And it was just a sampling area. There was 2 or 3 cases where they didn't have enough samples, so they couldn't prove that there was vitamin E in it. But clearly, 95% of the time they did. So it was all due to the same thing.
So the CDC, well, maybe I'll let you characterize it. Like, if they're not being clear about it, even to this day, I mean, what does that say about them as a public health agency?
Well, I think they justify the fact that they feel strongly that the message should be that vaping is bad for young people, and they don't really care how that message gets out there. I mean, so it's better. So technically, they could say that because there was, a number of cases where they didn't detect the vitamin E, then they can't say for 100% that was the case. But it's being a little bit deceptive.
Yeah, the Yale School of Medicine still has up their micro website on EVALI.
Yeah.
And in talking about it like it's still an existing thing.
Yeah. No, and I also the popcorn lung thing, which has a basis in Canada, and I talk about that in the book also, where sort of late in the valley, there was a case in London, Ontario, in Canada, of a kid who had the same exposure as EVALI, but there hadn't been really a case in Canada. And the CT scan of that particular young person was a bit out of keeping with the other EVALI cases, and they thought it could be like popcorn lung. And so they, without a biopsy, without really a good exposure history, they made this leap that this is probably popcorn lung, and they entitled their paper in the Canadian Medical Association journal, Possible Popcorn Lung due to Vaping. And there was an editorial accompanying that in the same article that basically that vaping causes popcorn lung. And that became an international story. And it had nothing to, it wasn't popcorn lung, it was a misread CT scan, and it's got a life of its own. And I'm amazed, all the people I talked to about why they would or wouldn't vape, popcorn lung came up like half the time. And as you probably know, this is a story from Missouri, from a popcorn factory with 8 cases ever. And so, and with very high exposure to diacetyl, and the case closed. They took that out of the factory. They reduced people's exposure to that, and they have found in some flavoring, it gives a buttery flavor, and So early on, some e-liquids did contain some diacetyl. It's since been taken off the market altogether, but in quantities that were nothing like the popcorn factory. It's a minuscule exposure to diacetyl that there's no way it caused any kind of lung damage like that. But it has a life of its own, and still is it's probably vaping stuck with popcorn lung now forever, I think.
I have to admit that reading this book gave me a little bit of post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Okay.
Only because it so accurately was describing and bringing back to memory some of the most outrageous and disastrous things people have said, about vaping. Now, I definitely get the book. I mean, it's worth it as a reminder of just all of the stuff that's happened. It's insane, including the Vape Fail CBC series. You went into that.
Yeah. No, it was, I mean, at the time I was kind of pulling my hair out listening to this, watching this, because I was quite interested in it. And yeah, it couldn't have been designed better as a propaganda message. And the CBT did quite a good job of kind of presenting it as sort of like good journalism and facts. And pretty much everything they said in that series was just wrong. and they had nobody on that series, so people don't know. It was like CBC did this string of shows around it and tried to expose vaping, and had kids on there who were making up stories about how prevalent it was in their schools and how many their friends were getting terribly sick, and had all these prohibitionists and tobacco control people on there talking about how terrible vaping was. Had no opportunity to talk to anybody who looked at it as harm reduction, nobody who had transitioned successfully from smoking to vaping. It was just all about how harmful this was to kids and society in general. And yeah, it was really a propaganda campaign.
You write in your book, one segment began with the erroneous statement, quote, "There has never been any firm evidence that vaping is safer than smoking, or that vaping can help people quit."
Yeah, that's how they open their show. And there is ample evidence of both those things. So it's yeah, I don't know how they got away with it, but because the medical community and public health was so against vaping or safer nicotine, I don't think anybody really questioned them. You can say whatever you want because we think it's bad for kids, it's bad for society, and just go overboard if you want to. But we just want to get the message out there that this is a scary, bad thing for people.
Yeah, and I think the last thing on that would be is that, and I found this horrible, but you write here that the CBC piece kind of was accusing the government of failing to regulate vaping products. So everything was wrapped around, and I think that final thing was to poke the politicians and so forth to make them do something.
Yeah. Well, I feel, a lot of the ultimate decisions are made at the political level, and I think that, we do our best to try and educate the politicians, but you can't really fault them for going to the public health experts and tobacco control experts to get their information and advice of what should be done, and that's what they're hearing. So when I hear politicians spouting off nonsense about vaping, they didn't make that up. They got it from people they thought they could trust, and the people that they're trusting, I think, are giving them the wrong information.
How much do you think this comes from the U.S.?
I think I think there some of it, but my colleagues in Canada who have been involved in tobacco, I think firmly believe that abstinence is the way to go, and they don't have that much flexibility in that. They, one thing, it's fascinating the way, and probably, advocates for vaping have kind of not done a good job in making vaping nicotine, a type of NRT, a nicotine replacement therapy. Basically, like people in tobacco control have no problem with sprays and gum and other ways to get oral nicotine. So this is just a way to get nicotine in a different way. So it should really have been, just an extension of normal nicotine replacement therapy. So we'll give you a patch of, didn't work well for you, why don't you try gum? I mean, there is a really good study looking at comparing gum and patches to patches alone, and the gum patches group did twice as well as far as abstinence goes after 6 months. So clearly other ways to get nicotine can be successful, and for me, vaping is just another way that people can successfully get nicotine and be satisfied with it and stop using cigarettes. So we've kind of put vaping off on its own as, and it's a terrible thing, but then, it's basically gum, only it's a little bit more vaporized, so.
Obviously, there's a medical path in Canada for, medical products, and same in the US, but yet nobody is going down that pathway with any of the products. There used to be some talk in the mid, aughts there, or 2015s or 2016s about that, but most people from the vaping community were fearful of that path.
Yeah.
And I don't know why.
No, I mean, I think it was, if it followed the standard pharmaceutical route, it's very expensive to bring something to market like that. So you need these massive randomized trials. I think that people were reluctant to get involved in anything to do with nicotine as far as these big trials. A lot of these big trials are funded by pharmaceutical companies, and that's their product. Nobody would take money from tobacco companies because they didn't trust it or didn't like the tobacco companies or thought it would be a bit shady to do that. So there was really no money to do those large randomized trials that would be necessary to get it through the medical unit. So I think that's kind of what happened to it. But I think it would have been highly successful if you had unlimited funding and set up these massive randomized trials. Vaping would come out on top for sure.
I think there's also just a position that these are consumer products.
Yeah, I think it's caught in that. So we've focused so much on kids, and so that's where the pushback has been. But once you get beyond that, I think in Canada, there's still a general idea that people have choice. Like it's your choice. Smoking a cigarette is not illegal, and so people can choose to do that. Drinking alcohol is not illegal. Now cannabis isn't illegal. So I think there's some understanding that an adult can make an informed decision and decide what they want to do. But somehow vaping falls into, oh no, we should ban all this stuff because what about the kids? And it doesn't really make that much sense because it's not in keeping with how we deal with other products who a consenting, informed adult can make that decision for themselves. And the book, I want to lay it out as clearly as possible that if you're really thinking through this from any kind of health perspective, your decision as a smoker should be to vape. Like it does not make that much sense to get your nicotine through burning tobacco. It's guaranteed that you'll get sick. And it doesn't, if you have the choice. And what makes vaping, I think, such a great intervention or great transition is that everything about it seems to be better. Like I understand talking to people who smoke that if they've used cigarettes for many years, it's really the way they get their nicotine, they have routines, they just don't really want to change that up. So I understand that it's not going to be easy for everybody to switch, but if you just write down, put a spreadsheet of pros and cons. I mean, there's so many pros to vaping. I mean, you can get flavors. It doesn't smell. It's much more subtle. It should be much more socially acceptable. You don't have to light a whole cigarette and burn the whole thing at once. It's just much more convenient. I mean, so it should be cheaper if it wasn't for the high taxes. So the spreadsheet for cigarettes versus vaping, just for pure enjoyment and convenience, should always favor vaping. And then you add the health difference. I mean, should be a slam dunk that everybody should be vaping and throwing away their cigarettes.